We all know that we're leading learning in times of exponential growth. There are pressures and also opportunities that are created by the developments in technology, how we construct and share information. A global focus on raising standards has placed quality teaching and quality teachers under the microscope. Even down to neuroscience, which is changing what we know about the process of learning, and therefore for leaders, the learning spaces and places that we design within our schools and beyond our schools. So tonight's webinar has sprung from some questions. What are the challenges for leadership? What are the potential lever points and strategies that we can use for improvement in our schools? So not just for managing change, but for leading improvement. Dr. Cheryl Doig is an educator, and she is the director of thinkbeyond.co.nz, an organisation with a focus on leadership, change management and innovation. What I'd like to do now is to get out of the way and to welcome Dr. Cheryl Doig tonight as we consider leading tomorrow. Over to you, Cheryl.
Thanks, everyone, and I am beaming to you from a place called Blenheim, a small city in New Zealand, and I'm actually at Marlborough Girls College, so you can see all the photos of the old school behind me. It's my pleasure to be here this afternoon, this evening, New Zealand time, and to just share a few ideas really with you about leading tomorrow. So I don't apologise for not just focusing on education, but to say the world is a big place and schools are situated in a social, ecological space that I think we need to know a little bit about. So we'll go to the big picture and at times we'll narrow down to education. And I guess I'd like to just start by really focusing on the collective intelligence, the work that you bring to this webinar, rather than just me, because I love to see the chat box flowing through with ideas and questions, and that those be harvested so I can ask questions or reply to challenges or ideas that you have. So there's a whole lot of research about the notion of collective intelligence, and it really talks about intelligence being not the average of the IQs of everyone in the room, or in this case online, but that there are two fundamental things that make a difference. The first of these is just the emotional intelligence, the ability to read and understand each other. And the second, I think, is really important, and that's the ability to take turns. In our schools of today for the future, I don't think we spend enough time in learning the skills of collaboration and of dialogue versus discussion. We are often in really busy places, and although we like to think that teachers will have really good communication skills and interact well, that's not always the case without planning and good practice. So collective intelligence, let's use the online intelligence this afternoon, and I really value your contributions. So let's just take that a step further, and some of the things that I think we'll focus on during this webinar is some of the leadership trends, starting with the big ideas that are beyond just leadership, to explore the important trend of collaboration and networks and what that sort of looks like, not just in the education space but beyond. And my trusty pointers are doing a great job of the role of adaptive leadership and complexity, because fundamentally I think this is one thing that will change the face of education and leadership as we move forward. There will be some practical ways in which you can move forward, but just a little sampling, because of course this is a huge topic. And so the last thing is the challenge to action. What will you take out of this? Where will you go? And what difference will it make to your leadership now and in the future? So I want to contextualize this and to talk about the different worlds that we inhabit. And you'll see in the slide that the inner circle is the inner world, and I like to think of this as being the physiological self, what I'm made up of, the way I think, the way my body functions, some days better than others, and there's a lot of other layers to me and the work that I do in leadership and in education, because in the blue circle you've got the experience world, and here we're talking about the who you are because of your interactions with your environment, and I think we all bring such vastly different experiences, and this is increasingly the case because our world is becoming more easily diverse in terms of the populations within our school cohort, within the staff, within the ability to connect across the world. But in my work, the spaces that I'm really interested in are the green and the yellow, because we've got our experiences. That's wonderful, and it also helps us to filter out all of the other material and ways of thinking from other people. We have assumptions that need to be challenged. We have some things we may have heard about but really don't know anything about, and that's what we call the known world. So yeah, I've heard of this particular idea, I don't know anything about it though. And so we explore. One of the key challenges, I think, for us as educational leaders is to stand in that inner circle and to look outwards beyond what we know, and to be very curious, because it's very easy for us to become insular as educators and to think that school exists for its own purposes and not for the purpose of living and learning and making a difference. So that brings me to the world of possibilities, and this is the world of things maybe you haven't heard of yet, that you don't know exist, and some of them you never will find out about. But that's an area that interests me because of my futurist background. And you'll see that it says open learners, because if we're expecting that from our children in our schools, then it starts with us as the adult learners and the adult leaders. So let's look a little bit at the world of possibilities. And so here's your first challenge. Let's just take a moment to have a look at these 6 words on the screen. And you'll be thinking, yep, I know what that is. I've heard of that one before. I've got no idea what that means, etc. All right, so we've got crowdsourcing, BYOD, WYOD, 3D printing, MOOCs, telepresence, and crowdfunding. So just in terms of your own curiosity and wondering, in the chat box, just take a moment to record one that you don't know anything about, or very little, but that you're curious about. Which one would it be? Number 1, number 5, and just put it in the chat box. Great, so I can see those starting to come through. All right, so we've got number 5 and 6, we've got quite a few MOOCs. All right, so keep those thoughts coming through, and we'll look at some of these in a little bit more depth during the presentation. And I'm just going to ask, let's take number 4, MOOCs. If you know what MOOCs are, can you just put a smiley face on the screen next to your name, and let us know that you at least know what they are. You may not be an expert. So let's see who does know. All right, so the smiley face, one of the emoticons. Great, so PalNet does. All right, so we've got Simon and Karen, a few people. And we're not going to dig deeply into what a MOOC is, but what I'd say is we know we have collective intelligence in the room, in the virtual room today, and what I'd normally do in a space is say, who are the experts and how can we collectively build our knowledge so that we're richer? And I think this is fundamentally important for us in our schools, that there isn't enough cross-fertilization of knowing what other people know and collectively sharing, because we all say we're busy. And yet leaders of tomorrow need to be looking for the trends and what's out there. So MOOCs, massive open online courses. One of the huge trends in terms of technology, for good or for bad, is the notion of being able to take past part in open learning environments where you're online with thousands of people across the world, where you have experts at your fingertips. Some of the environment is in a learning management system. You can dig deeper, you can explore links, and there are some live events. So it's synchronous and asynchronous, and it's a real mix of learning pathways. And I guess for me, this is part of the trend for people to have many more choices about their education. If you haven't taken part in a MOOC, then I suggest you do a Google. You'll find people like Stephen Downes that are experts in this area. It's an interesting area to delve into and to wonder, so what difference will this make to my practice? So I guess the difference between a MOOC and something like the Khan Academy is that it's a much more interactive space with experts running lectures, or the opportunity for you to share ideas with other people and to form communities of practice, to make connections with different people around the world, and it can be a really fascinating and powerful tool, especially when you see in the online part of the environment, the chat box coming through with all sorts of suggestions, and you know that it's coming from around the world. So just wonder about all of those things, and so what difference will that make for me in education? If we consider, we go back to this slide here, the world of possibilities, maybe at the beginning there was a word there that you hadn't even heard of, and now at least you have some sort of idea, and it may be something you want to explore, if there's a particular purpose for you to do that. So I want to explore some of these ideas just briefly, and to make connections with education and what this means for us in terms of our learning. Here's the first one. Now, my hometown, the place that I live in between working, is Christchurch, and many of you will know that we had quite a number of earthquakes, and we're still in recovery mode. One of the sites that has started is the Ministry of Awesome. So this is one of many sites that connects to people and their conversations and their needs. The idea is, I have something I want to talk about, I have an idea I want to share, I put it online, and people have the opportunity to rate it and decide whether it's a really good idea. And those ideas that bubble to the surface are the ones that are explored. Now for me, this is part of the leadership and education about real-time feedback. So in our schools, in our businesses, we have a lot of feedback that is when things have passed. So how many times have you been part of an appraisal process or something where after 6 months or after a year, someone, if you're lucky, talks about your progress and how you're meeting your goals, etc. These sorts of things with technology are real-time feedback that everyone has the option to explore. So those feedback loops is a really important part of the rapid prototyping design movement. It's no longer good enough as leaders to be asking people how it went in retrospect. I have a young man that works for me. He's 16, and one of the things he said at the end of last year was, the teacher gave us a survey to talk about their learning. I wish she'd given it early in the year so that I could have given feedback that would have made a difference to my learning. So for me, this is about the open connectivity and us really engaging with people in real time. And the question is, so how can we do this in our schools in ways that are engaging and offer people the opportunity to share their ideas and to rate and to give feedback? Because if we take this a step further, we come to the whole notion of open government, which for me is about open schools and education as well, the whole crowdsourcing movement. And this is in this case, this is Finland, and what they did was put together a citizens initiative. If there were 50,000 people, so you had a great idea and you put it up online, and you had 50,000 people that voted for your idea within 6 months, then the government was forced to vote on it. So again, the power much more is coming through the voice of the community and the students. And I think if we don't understand that as leaders in our role, then we're not only missing a wonderful opportunity to embrace a whole lot of new people, but we're also in danger of becoming irrelevant and people voting with their feet in terms of the work that they do. So, you know, that's I think a fundamental shift in the whole notion of the wisdom of the crowd. And you'll see that it says crowdsourcing, because the whole focus of crowdsourcing is that you are collectively engaging with people across many different platforms. So if you look at crowdsourcing, you'll find that some are sites where I want an idea, I've got a problem, I want it solved. I can put up money and have people respond from all around the world with my project. It can be a community, a social network where I want to do good. So there's lots of different crowdsourcing options, but the clear message about that is there are people outside of your school and outside of academia and outside of your country who have lots of ideas that you can tap into. And you know, even the military have crowdsourcing sites where they ask people for ideas and connect. And for me, part of the power of this is not just connecting with other educators. Talking to other teachers, other principals, other leaders is fabulous because you get the same context and the same language. The disadvantage is you don't get the blend and the blur between education, schooling, and what's happening in the world you're educating for. So that's the next stage of crowdsourcing. And when we build on that, the whole notion of crowdfunding comes into play. And you think how hard it is to attract people to fund developments in your school and where that money comes from currently. But there's also a movement for people to crowdfund new ideas. And that if I've got an idea that I want to pursue, I can put it out as a Kickstarter and see who wants to help pay for that project. And in fact, the small people can put money together. In this case, this is a huge skyscraper in Bogota that was collectively built from small pieces of money from what are called the famous common people. In other words, it's you and I and just the whole connecting of normal people rather than big business or banks. And so again, taking what we've been talking about further, this is about everyone having an interest in your school or your organisation, maybe connecting with funding, but certainly having an opinion and what that means for you when you're increasingly online and in that environment. And I can see some great ideas coming through the feed about connections to education, etc. I think those are really important to share, and I know I will be going back to have a look at the connections. I also talked about telepresence, and some people said, no, I'm not quite sure what that is. Most of you will have heard of virtual learning, of video conferencing. This is, I guess, the next step. Robotics is a huge growth area in all aspects of business and life. And in this example, you'll see that there is this is here is the robot. And the idea of this is it takes the whole telepresence to another level, because this robotic may be in your organisation, your business, and it connects in real time. So if you imagine your boss, your superintendent, your whatever, moving around your buildings in actual real time, connecting with your staff, talking to you, etc. Yeah, some of you will be really scared about that, and others will think, well, that's fascinating. But what it does do is bring that whole notion of collaboration to a really different level, because no, you can't rely on them being out of the office. You know, it's just like, oh, I'm just beaming in, and I'm not beaming in with a screen so that you can see me around the table. I'm beaming in just in a normal real-time situation and saying, oh, you know, Karen, that's great. What's your day going like? And Shannon, I see you have been working on such and such a project and being able to move around the spaces. Now, what does that mean in terms of leadership that's different? I think we're in for some very interesting times, and it makes the present, the actual physical collaboration and leadership fundamentally important for building relationships, and it also challenges us to be able to work on relationships that are different in the future. So yeah, robotic avoidance is a whole new sphere of working, and the other extent of that is that there's an increase in the maker movement. The whole notion that we can make things, we can do it yourself, that I might want to do this part of my education here, but I want to go down the road and do this part here. I want to do this part online. This is the Wellington Maker Space, which I visited last week, and essentially in the centre of the city they have a maker space where people can go maybe in their lunch hours or after work and make things with 3D printers or laser cutters or just the old-fashioned way. It means that people don't have to have all their equipment and own tools. So it's like the men's shed in the city for everyone. And in terms of leadership, this is very much about us not having to have all the things ourselves, but to say, look, a school down the road has a real passion and interest in this. We can do these things. Let's collaborate and do things differently. It's a different notion. And again, coming back to the Christchurch example, the schools in Christchurch, some have been told they're going to close, some have been told they're going to merge, and they've been asked to collaborate and to look at ways that they might be able to do things differently. So the challenge for some of them is to say, well, let's work towards building a new school that does have some resources that you have and others that come down the road and others that connect with business. It's a very different way of working. And that might be by sharing resources across schools or remotely. It may also be taking it to the next step of having things that are much more mobile. So what can you share in a mobile technological way? This is an example of the Spark truck, which goes around schools in the States and really focuses on using 3D equipment and laser cutting, etc., and sharing some of those ideas with schools. So it can be done in very creative and different ways. And I guess just to come to the end of this section of the presentation. So what does that mean for me in terms of my leadership? I reckon it means that things are going to get more complex than ever. So Mark, I'm just going to stop there for a moment and just see if people have got questions or there are some particular themes that seem to be coming through. Okay, no worries, Cheryl. And while people have a little bit of a think and maybe pop up some questions in the text chat box, I'll just make some comments, give you a chance to moisten your throat. Thank you so much so far for what you've shared with us, Cheryl. The concept of moving from the inner world to a world of possibilities certainly resonated with people, and I saw activity around that, and we've heard a bit about MOOCs, and that was a useful conversation for the people that hadn't heard of, multi-open courses. I flicked up a definition from Wikipedia there, the answer to everything. I particularly liked that notion of feedback loops to allow for rapid prototyping, and that's something that we're hearing a lot more in an educational sense, and I popped up some information I'd gathered this morning around exactly that topic, about students needing to know, be involved in the planning of learning, be involved in the reviewing of their learning as it was happening. I think you touched on something just then with the Spark truck, this notion that everybody doesn't need everything all the time, but they need access to the tools that they require to get the job done when they need access to those tools, which is a different skill set and a different mindset. I liked Stephen's comment about wanting to be beamed into his school on an iPad and carried about his school by his secretary. That sounded interesting, and I think, that was Simon, and I think that Stephen
posed a question I'd asked about Scootle and whether it had a social capacity, and Stephen said that there's a new ESA social media space. So I'm interested to hear a bit more about that from him at another time. So let's just have a quick look at the text chat. Once we move on from the robots to do our paperwork, so clearly you've distracted these pre-Easter people by suggesting technology may make their lives easier. Welcome, Stephanie. Thank you, Simon. Yes, I am a principal. Mark Yates, again, has highlighted that rapid prototyping concept. Shannon's placed the MOOC link into a discussion forum that's been created in PowerNet. More on that a little bit later on. Oh, no, that was a question for Mark. He's not a principal too, but he's been around. That's good to hear. So if I could just check before we go back to Cheryl, any other questions at this moment in time for Cheryl about what they've heard so far? You can either put up your virtual hand and provide that question in real time, or you can post that into the text chat box now or any time during the next part. Sounds good. Welcome, great. Stephanie. I think I said that. Let's go back to you, Cheryl. Back to you in your fabulous studio there in the school in New Zealand.
Great, thanks, Mark. And I put in the box just about the whole notion of rapid prototyping. There's a whole lot of leadership work around the notion of agile leadership, and that comes in lots of forms. It's used a lot in technology where they're doing rapid cycles of development. So you can look up agile leadership or scrums as one example, and I gave an example in some of the schools I was working with this afternoon of schools where they have stand-up meetings for 15 minutes with a set structure and a set of protocols that are designed to give feedback on how far you have come in your direction, and it's a very planned process, standing up, 15 minutes, structured, and then you move back to your places. But each week you're accountable for how you are moving forward in the particular focus of your school. So there's a lot happening in that sort of space. Yeah, stand-up meetings. We have meetings far too often for far too frivolous a reason. They need to be short and sharp and focused, unless they're so profoundly important that they are going to make a huge difference for learning. So, yeah. I've got a lot I could say in that sort of area. So just in terms of, can you just give me a smiley face if you have heard of 3D printing, or maybe you know quite a bit about it? So just give me an emoticon smiley face. Great, they're coming through.
And Cheryl, just a quick comment. When people are popping in the emoticons, you might find it easier to use the tool in the chat box. So just to the right of where you would enter words, there's a little grayed out smiley face. If you choose that and then just press enter, it will remain there. Whereas the ones that you might choose in the bottom menu, they appear and then magically disappear, just in case you were getting frustrated.
Great. All right, so some smileys aren't working, but yeah. And we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about them, but it's the whole notion of 3D printing in terms of leadership that I guess I just want to talk about for a moment, because I talked before about looking outwards from education, and I want to use 3D printing as an example. So, you know, 3D printing is to do with additive manufacturing, with building things up a layer at a time. So you actually are printing a 3D object. And it's easy to say, well, yeah, that's really interesting, and man, hasn't technology come a long way? But that doesn't mean anything to me as an educator or in my leadership role. And I'd say fundamentally, so how does it make a difference? Because it's no accident that the slide is in a pool of water with a ripple, and for me it's about exploring those weak signals and saying, well, look, there's a pattern forming, and from that a trend, and maybe I need to be interested, because these are just some of the areas that 3D printing is going to affect. We talked a little bit about the maker movement, but it will alter the way manufacturing happens. So obviously if I'm in manufacturing, I'd want to know a lot about 3D printing. Medicine, the whole notion of being able to print your own organs, or I've got a tooth that needs to be replaced, I can get it printed. Think about how powerful that is. But when we take the ripples out further and we look at the whole notion of collaborative spaces, we've got, you know, down here we've got the collaborative spaces. Well, that's about connecting and not having to do all the work yourselves, but connecting with other people online by sharing resources. We've talked about that a little. We've talked forever in education about personalisation, but things like 3D printing, which I predict will be as important as the internet has become, will be fundamentally driving the whole notion of personalisation and the need to do things that meet my needs in different ways. Because if we take the notion of medicine as an example, as we move forward in 3D printing, we will see that customised medicine starts to become prevalent. In other words, I can have a pill that's designed for me, my particular body, my needs, and it will be different from the pill that Mark's given or the support that he's given. So when we look at that in terms of our leadership, it will be even more important to differentiate our learning and also our leadership of how we work with other people, especially the Gen Y and Z people as they come through our school systems to become employed by your school or by your organisations. They'll think fundamentally differently in some cases. And you'll also see that the spare parts available immediately, that it increases, I guess, the cycle of time where you can get things done here and now, and adds pressure to us in our leadership roles that it's going to be challenging. Okay, so, you know, I guess my point is that the ripples do affect us, and it's important that we have a viewpoint on that. And as part of my work, what I do is also explore the things that are pertinent and particular to leadership, the research, the new books that are out, the social networks. And when I put those all together in a word cloud, you can see that there are some things that really bubble up as being important. And you'll say, well, you know, these things have always been important. But when you add the layer of technology over the top, in some respects they will change in terms of how they're delivered. And so you'll see that there's the notion of being networked, but there's also things like this freelancing, because there are more and more people that are deciding not to be employed by someone but doing their own thing. In fact, in the States, it's one of the biggest movements. They have unions for freelancers, for things like their medical insurance, etc. So you may find that in your workplace you have an even bigger number of people who are part-time, full-time, come in for special projects, and that's also the world that you're preparing your young people for in the workforce, and that will look a little different. So when I put all those things together, this is what it looks like to me. These are the 5 things I think are the big ideas about leadership as we move forward. So let's just have a look at these, and I'll explain them very briefly. And we start with the adaptive at the top. This is about the complexity of our environment really requiring us to think in an and both way, rather than thinking that there will always be a solution to something. So it's about looking at the whole system, and it's about feeling comfortable that things are complex and challenging. So far sight and near sight, looking in close, looking out from the balcony. Then you'll also see the networked leadership, and this is a growth area with technology, because collaboration is key. It's no longer possible, or not just desirable, but possible for teachers to be in their own areas without collaborating. Technology has changed that fundamentally, but it also means that we are connected in new ways, not just with technology, but with the need to look online for us to do more work across learning areas and not to be so siloed. And I think that's a big difference from what we've done in the past. from some of the slides previously, you'll see that I've got self-regulating there, and I think this is going to be much harder for us as leaders, as school principals, as team leaders, to unplug, and yet it will become increasingly important. So, what is it that we do to take time out, either from technology or from the things that we're doing, for us to join the slow movement, for us to engage in mindfulness, self-reflection, those sorts of things will be an increasing issue that we need to be aware of. And then in terms of the contextual leadership, we're really talking about the increased diversity of our schools, of our populations, as we get people from around the world mixing together in new ways, both physically and online. And a number of schools I work with have really struggled because suddenly their school population has changed and they haven't been able to adapt very quickly to meet the needs of their new community. So it's that complexity of cultural intelligence, it's the different ways of thinking, the different religions, and the unique context that you bring to your place. And then in the centre, we've got the ethical, the relationships and behaviours. And lots of people would say, yeah, but that's always been a fundamental, important part of leadership. Absolutely agree. And at the same time, ethical behaviour, if you look online, you look in your newspapers, you'll see that we know about breaches of ethics much sooner than we would in the past. We all have an opinion, and as we're educating our young people for being in the online environment, we're also trying to work with them to understand that what they put online is there forever, and all of the things that come with that. So, fundamentally, ethical leadership for me is the key that holds it all together. So yeah, just have a look at those 5, and this time, what I'd suggest that you have a go at doing is that if I go down to here for a moment, let's just I don't know if I can do it. On the list down the bottom, you'll see some clip art. Should be just on the left of your slide screen. And if you go down the ribbon to the one that's right at the bottom, you'll see that it says place clip art on the page. And there's some common symbols there. So for example, if I have a tick, I can just move it over and place a tick there. Yep. So just see if you can find that. Mark, you might have some better instructions than me to get there. But here's the challenge, is to put one of the clip art symbols by the one that you think is most important for the future in your environment. Maybe it's something you're doing well or not, but just put a tick beside the one that you think is fundamentally important at your stage, in your place.
Great, thanks Cheryl. So people are looking for the little mountain and sun symbol, which is under the camera symbol in the tiny little toolbar just to the left of the shared whiteboard, in case you're looking around for that. And I can see by you some of the naughty people that you've discovered a whole range of those. Just while you grab a moment there, Cheryl, to cast your eyes over the text chat and have a look at the mess they're making on your screen. A couple of quick comments up to this moment in time, if you don't mind. We've just touched on the maker movement. I think that was a really interesting concept for people to hear about, how people are making use of resources in more flexible ways. And you talked about 3D printing, which for me was a really interesting take on a tool that is becoming more and more obvious all the time. Every time I go to a trade show for education, there's a 3D printer running off more weapons for Lego men. I think the whole notion of freelancing is a really intriguing one, and certainly we're hearing a lot more of schooling as a service, and freelancing in terms of provision of an education service delivery, which could be brokered or offered out as schooling as service, is certainly very interesting, I think. The bit that struck home for me when you talked about adaptive leadership was this notion of celebrating ambiguity, welcoming change, valuing diversity, and expecting complexity. And that, as I said in the text chat box, diversity is the new norm, and we just need to accept that and work with that. I follow on Twitter a hashtag, which is a #ethical leadership, which often I get quite a lot of useful things from too. So back to you, Cheryl.
For that, Mark, a good summary. And I guess it's no surprise that often the ones that people focus on are the networked and adaptive, and I agree in my work that they are the ones that are fundamentally different. So for our last bit of time together, I want to focus on those, and in particular on the networked, because I think we've entered the challenge zone, and that there are some things that are status quo, and we want to have those things in our school that are certain, that there are systems for, and that people are agreed how they'll move forward. And at the other end, the chaos is the area we find ourselves in. Here, there's a picture of Christchurch here. We find ourselves in occasionally, and as leaders, we take action and try to move out of as quickly as possible. But this challenge zone of pushing the boundaries and stepping back and being comfortable in the networked world is something that requires real adaptive leadership. And so for me, this is the notion of a networked leader. We've done lots of work and talking in the past about instructional leadership, foundationally important for educators. Couldn't agree more. But what I've done in this slide is take the work of Michael Fullan's instructional leaders and take it to the network leaders stage. So for me, this is about moving forward from there. So you'll see those dark words are words that I have changed from just being an instructional leader, because I say that is not enough either. That where we've got understanding and it says learners, in the instructional leadership it says students. And from a leadership point of view, I think we need to dig deeper and understand that our teachers, our staff, our parents, etc., are learners as well. So it's not just about students, it's and both for the benefit of students. It's not just about sharing challenges across schools, but also about collaborating between schools, and for me that's a fundamental difference that we need to be working on. And then the whole importance of data. Now, that comes through clearly in the instructional leadership, evidence-informed practice, and behind that there's a whole increasing in the learning analytics that sit behind that. That's a huge subject in itself. In learning to drive that technology so it can enhance without getting in the way of learning. Some of the other things you'll see are exactly the same, and so you can read those through for yourself, but that one message and one focus, I think, is even more important in a networked world, because we are just full of initiatives. We do all sorts of different things and just add them to the list without taking things away or networking and making sense of things or working together in smarter ways. The learning for all, and right at the bottom you'll see connected influences, which is what I've added, because this is the focus on leadership as an influencing opportunity rather than an authority or a person. And so I just think these things enhance the whole notion of instructional leaders to be, and that on top of the networked leaders that will make it even more powerful and connected in global ways. Yeah, learning for all for learning. Yeah, so that's my take on Michael Fullan. And to just provide an example of that, in Christchurch we've got 5 companies that have had to combine their work together to help with the rebuild. So these are all engineering and structural firms, etc. Now they decided that it was best to collaborate, and that's quite unusual because normally these businesses are in competition, and they decided to collaborate not to take more money, but because it was going to make the rebuild happen faster. But what interests me is that on their website, the first thing that you see is that they work as separate companies and organisations. They share the profits and losses each week, but here's what they've got at the top: the SCIRT mindsets and values and the SCIRT behaviours. And I just think that's a really powerful thing in terms of our network, that still we need to come back to the principles and the golden circle of why we're doing what we're doing, and connecting back with that as a leader. Sometimes, though, when we're moving forward in our leadership, we have people that aren't moving at the pace that we want to, and that's where I agree with Michael Fulham when he says just actually sometimes you have to do something. So really fire aim, which actually came from the work of Peters and Waterman, just get people doing something small and moving forward and having success, and that will help reinforce the changes in their beliefs. But we can't sit still any longer and not move forward, because our young learners are moving past us, and if we don't want to become irrelevant, we need to be looking for those trends. And those same trends are the ones that we often don't see as adults in the community. We keep doing the same things. I mean, how many meetings have you had, or things that you've done, and you think, actually, this doesn't work, man. We've had a meeting and it was all full of teachers and not the parents that we were trying to serve, and it's time to step back and say, what do we need to do differently, rather than blaming others for something that doesn't work. So I think that's an important part of leading for the future. So here's a couple of tools that I use in my work. This is connected with learner voice and the whole notion that in our organisations we might be trying to move learner voice forward, but what does that actually look like? And you'll see that the continuum along the top here, we go from inform, which really is telling. I'm the adult or the person in charge, and this is how it's going to be. So as we move up from there, we start discussing things, and although it's adult initiated, we sometime later in the process might ask students what they think. And then as we move up from there, we are still really deciding as adults, but we're involving the students at a much earlier stage of the development and taking their things on board for the way that they want to do things. As we move up, this is much more of a co-created environment where students and adult learners work together to form some new ideas. And then right at the top, we've got entrust. You guys know what you're doing. You go away, you've got a good idea, fantastic, run with it, keep me posted, I'm here to help if you need me. Now, this is the ladder of collaboration, and along the horizontal, you've got student voice within their learning environment, so it's within the context of their classroom or their curriculum area. Moving across to, do students have a voice in your organisation, and what does that look like in terms of making a difference to your school as a whole? What about across the community? So community service, outreach, relationships with businesses, etc. And then the global network, the sustainability, the global projects, things like deforestation, etc. And with all of these, who is it that controls it? So this is just a really useful tool, I think, in terms of asking people to think about their own schools and organisations. What sort of things do you do? And can I just add that each of these things are important. There are times when you do need to inform. It's not all everyone has a say in everything, but it's understanding as leaders the complexity of that and how you might be able to use these things. So if you just take a few moments again with the clip art tool, you know, there might be something you think, actually, we're doing a really good job with some global projects, etc. And so I'm going to put that in the global entrusting. Kids are go off doing their own things without us interfering. Or you might think, actually, I've got something down here in that sort of box So just, have a very quick play by putting a piece of clip art in place. And, the idea of this isn't to fill in every box, but to just look at where your school's at and to have the conversation and to say, are we happy about where we sit, or what do we see as our next steps in terms of having the learners involved in the learning as well. Okay, and so just keep those bits of clip art coming, because one of the powerful ways of using this is to actually map it out. What are all the things that we have students involved in, and where would we place those things? Sometimes just the whole dialogue around that can be quite interesting as people have assumptions about what they're doing. It's also a useful thing for people to do in different parts of the school, or to say, well, let's give it to the students, wonder what they'd come up with, and what's their evidence.
And I think Tracy made a really good point there. When I went to place my symbol on there, I thought about a specific context. Mine's the little pinned notepad, and that was where, essentially I'd created an event, an opportunity. I involved the learners, and it was about being part of a global project, but it was adult initiated, and it was a great activity. But the interesting thing is, I wouldn't have considered, where it sat within a matrix. So that's really useful where you think of a particular context, and then drop an activity into it.
Yeah, and I think it's also useful for, if we take that pin that you dropped there, to say, I wonder what it would have taken for me to take that to the collaborate stage. What would it look like if you extended it? So just those conversations and thoughts can be useful.
Look, there you go.
And it might look very different in your school. Yep.
That's exactly what it would look like. I've done it for you. It was that easy.
Yeah. Yeah, so again, the aim isn't to get to where the cross is. The aim is to look at your particular environment and then have the conversation about, yeah, I like where we're at the moment. I think we've gone far enough. Or, you know what, I think there's an opportunity for us to move into the global network and the student voice. So when we take that a step further, you've also got the same sort of thing that you can do when you are implementing your change for anything that you're working on in your leadership. The inform, consult, involve, collaborate and trust is just as useful as a tool for your change program with the community as it is with students in terms of their learning. So, consider the different ways. Well, for this particular thing that we're pushing ahead in our thinking, we're going to inform the parents about this particular aspect in this way. Here we're going to involve them a little bit more in the creation of things. Actually, we're going to collaborate with a school down the road because we've both got so much in common, but just mapping that out is a really useful way of moving forward. So, I guess a lot of this thinking is about the design thinking and the ability to think about it as human-centered design and how can we move the learning forward, because for me that's what the leadership is all about, connecting to the big picture, the networks, and also the adaptive leadership. So I just wanted to round off by saying that as leaders, it's really important for us to understand that some things are simple, and we might have those things in our school that there's a call. I know if this happens, that this will happen, and so decisions are really obvious. We have a whole lot of complicated things in our school, and there's not one answer, but we have previous experience from other places. We've got experts that we can call on, and once we've got that expert knowledge, we can come to some sort of conclusion or make it up in terms of our cultural environment. But this part over here, this complex, is where, as leaders, we are increasingly situated. And even with that task with the student leadership metrics, when we're dealing with people, it gets messy and there's not necessarily an answer. This is the adaptive leadership space, and one I think that is fundamentally important for us to work on and feel comfortable in. And of course, we know the chaos space. This is the space where we can't make sense of anything and we need to get out of it as quickly as possible. So I guess in terms of your leadership, you're thinking, you're standing here, and it's just being really clear about, you know, what sort of a decision do I need to make? Is it complicated? Is it complex? And it sort of just finishes off by looking like this, is that if it's a simple thing, I've got a recipe that I can follow. If it's complicated, it's something like an operation. There's not one way of doing it. Each patient is unique, but they're not operating from no knowledge. They've got previous experience to go on. The complex is like bringing up children. It's hard to, the manual doesn't work, and sometimes it's only in retrospect that you know what might have been a better alternative, and then the chaos down the bottom. So I think that's, you know, important for us to be thinking about, because in the adaptive space, man, there's such a lot of diversity, and we have to be acknowledging that and sharing that in a lot of different ways. So just to finish off and hand back to Mark, you know, there is a need to do some of the things that we've been doing, and to make some changes, and to also keep challenging. So I just put this slide in for you to go back to, that if you do want to step into the scary territory of the future in the world of learning agents and what education might be like in the future, this is a really good site, thefutureofed.org, for a whole lot of provocations that will move you forward. And so just to challenge you from the slides and the things that we've talked about today is half an idea that you have, and what action would you take, excuse me, to make it whole? And so maybe that might be something useful while I hand over to Mark, for you to just put down in the chat box, so what? Half an idea I have, an action I'd take to make it whole. So what are your thoughts? And you know, thanks very much for your participation. I'm going to hand back to Mark.
Great, thank you very much, Cheryl. And there's your invitation, everyone, to place some final questions, comments to Cheryl on that So What Next. And you can see I've just popped up a slide with Cheryl's email address and also the thinkbeyond.co.nz website. Shannon's going to pop up our own community of practice address into the text chat box in a moment, and that's for any materials that we managed to glean from the fabulous Cheryl Doig, the rubrics people have been asking about, and the slide stack. Once we've got permission, we'll make those available through that community of practice. In that last little slice of the pie, Cheryl's talked about the importance of networked leaders, about a model of contributive practice where leaders need to contribute back to growing the profession of school leadership. She talked about design thinking and learning design, and I guess also talked about the complexity of leadership, where things are simple, but also where things may be complex and can shift, as we all know, within a few minutes between one or the other. Certainly there are challenges, both internal and external, for schools and leadership. But leadership, as I think Cheryl has suggested, is indeed a pack activity. It requires a team to generate shared solutions to shared problems that are facing our schools today. And one of the ways that we can do that is being part of a community of practice. And indeed, what we're doing tonight here is modelling that. We're thinking out loud in the spaces in between one another around the things which matter to us in education. So I'm just running my eyes through that text chat box. There's quite a lot there. What we're going to be doing is having all of the text chat transcribed and available through that PowerNet group. That should be popping up. I'll just have a look in the text chat box. There it is. Leading tomorrow, we have a forum set up in our community of practice, which is free and available to anyone at powernet.edu.au if you're not already a member. Couple of notices before we wrap up this fabulous webinar this afternoon. One is to let you know that Student Principal for a Day, that's sp4d.edu.au, that someone's going to pop up in the text chat box for me, is coming up later on this year, which allows students to sit in the hot seat of school leadership. It places student leadership and school leadership under the magnifying glass and fits in well if we're considering exploring the complexities, the challenges and the wonder of school leadership. The other thing just to draw people's attention to is the fact that our next webinar is all around the school leaders' experience with school Facebook sites. So not Facebook sites for students that you want to fight over to do with cyberbullying and stuff like that, but how school leaders are using and experiencing Facebook sites for their own schools. So in wrapping up, thank you very much to Shannon McGeary helping out tonight on the control deck, and also thank you to Karen Lablack. Thank you to our participants making time to attend this webinar tonight, and wishing you a safe and wonderful Easter break. And of course, huge thanks to the fabulous Dr. Cheryl Doig for sharing so freely with us her experience and her wisdom around school leadership, change and innovation. So thank you all, and a very good night and happy Easter.